All right. I think we should be good to go.
And Dan, just for clarity, the other side of this is also a public meeting, so members of the public could also be joining us.
Correct. Yep. There are. It looks like we have got one member of the public currently on, but yes, people were able to register and join. But they'll be just the folks you're seeing here will be the people that are on screen.
Terrific. Thanks, Dan, for that. Welcome to our colleague who's a member of the public. Thanks for being with us. And hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience with, ironically, some technical snags as we launch our subgroup on workforce and the power and potential of AI. It's good to be with you. Appreciate you all being flexible. And Dan, thanks again for springing to action to help us out. I'm excited about this conversation. It's perhaps the first of many. Just as a reminder, I'm Chris Mallett. I'm a member of the leadership team at the Rue Institute. And I circulated an agenda in advance as just a proposal for how we might use our first hour together when we think about implications for AI in the workforce. If it's okay, I thought we might start with just a reminder of introductions in this smaller group, just very succinct introductions so we remember who we all are. And maybe any opening sort of observation you may have about the topic of AI in the workforce to kind of anchor your introduction if you'd like, and then I'll facilitate us through the rest of our agenda. Does that sound okay? Awesome. Anyone want to lead off?
Sounds great, Chris. I'll lead off.
Thanks, Eric.
You bet. So my name's Eric Austin. I'm the Deputy Bureau Director for the Bureau of Unemployment, which is part of the Department of Labor. I think, my impressions as we get started talking about workforce is, how related our discussions are likely to be with the education subgroup and how those two groups, may be thinking in tandem about some of the solutions going forward. And I will hand it off to the next person, and I guess I'll hand it off to Sam since you're next in line on the list.
Perfect. And that's a good segue, Eric, because I've been actually thinking about the same kinds of connections. So I'm Sam Boss with the Maine AFL-CIO, representing organized labor. I run a pre-apprenticeship program to get people into building and construction trades unions. And before that, I worked in community engagement at Bates College. So I think a lot about various education pathways into the workforce and, how both trades pathways and higher ed pathways through 4 and 2-year colleges can fit in with everything that we're talking about. I think there's extraordinary potential, but I also think there's a lot to be cautious about and a lot that we need to be conscientious about on the front end as we're looking at some of these changes. And I will pass it off to Julia.
Hello, everybody. Julio Trujillo, part of the Maine Community College System team. I think it's a good segue as I feel we are sort of at that intersection, probably at the epicenter of that crater between education and workforce. We have a significant side of the house, our traditional side of the house, that is on like sort of the academic side that works with mostly traditional students, but as probably many of you know on the call, our workforce training side through the Harold Alphons Center for the Advancement of Maine's Workforce has developed significantly over the last few years. So in the calls that we've had so far, my mind has been on the incumbent workers and how to engage them in this space. So that's where my head is at and where that challenge is and how to do it both meaningfully while cautiously and ensuring that our workers have the skills they need to succeed. So I'll pass it on to, I think, Warren.
Yes, thanks, Julia. Hi, everybody. My name is Warren Valbanis, and my business is called Future of Work Partners. We're based here in Portland and in New York. We actually are a spin out from. We used to be part of a quant hedge fund called Two Sigma in New York, and we what we do is we invest in companies and then try to modernize them to be aligned with the future of work, and we try to do it in a way that's thoughtful about workforce voice and ultimately try to do it in a way that creates good jobs. There's two kinds of companies we invest in. We invest in companies that are themselves transforming. And actually, one of our companies is called Penn Foster, which does a whole bunch of vocational training for about 300,000 students in the skilled trades, high school, and in healthcare. And then the other thing we do is we invest in technologies that help to modernize companies and align them with the future of work. I also teach a course at NYU on the topic of the future of work. So I spend all my time thinking about how companies are transforming as a result of AI and other forces. And I think change is coming faster than many of us, many folks out there in the world suspect. I'll just tell a quick story about what worries me. I asked all the students at NYU that I was teaching what they wanted to do and what they thought AI was how it was going to affect them. They all want to work as bankers. They all think AI is going to make their lives a lot easier, but they haven't thought about the next thing that AI might do. So anyway.
Thanks, Warren. That's really fast. I hadn't picked up on that part about the company dimension of your work, so I'm really glad that you emphasized that today. And Julia, thanks for highlighting the work of the Alphon Center. Mark or Dave?
Mark, go ahead.
Sure. Mark McInerney. So I oversee labor statistics programs for the state. And so I think about this topic kind of from the employer and worker perspective. So from the employer perspective, how do employers incorporate this technology and change the way that they produce goods and services and deliver those to customers? And then from the worker perspective, how is that going to lead to a shifting, demand for various types of skills and education? And how do workers adapt to that and navigate that and prepare for that kind of changing landscape?
So I think that leaves it to me, Dave Degler, Maine Community Colleges. I think that this subgroup is especially important and especially valuable. I imagine every participant who comes to a subgroup with the perspective of their industry will think that. But we have three different channels in which we need to think about AI. One is, how can it help us do our jobs better, more efficiently, more effectively? Secondly, how do we use AI to make sure that we're supporting and adding to the educational process and not shortcutting the educational process? And that's where our faculty end up spending, I think, an inordinate amount of time. I think those arguments are kind of old, kind of like the old calculator arguments. But and then thirdly, we have a responsibility to prepare the future workforce for an environment that will be supported with artificial intelligence, meaning that all of those jobs are going to change. And as Warren has indicated, that change is happening faster than we realize, and keeping pace with that change and preparing the workforce is especially vexing. So, but we can't just sort of sit back and watch it happen. We have to be engaged and be a part of the process. So I do think, and Julia mentioned our work with the Alphon Center, our direct engagement with employers is going to be a valuable piece there.
Yeah. Well said, David. I think that's what's, for me personally, so interesting about this topic and this subgroup is, so many things converge on the workforce opportunity. So the integration, the intersection of education and technology, the intersection of work and education, the past, present, and future implications and risks of all of those things. It's why I sort of raised my hand and said I'd like to work on the subgroup that's focused on workforce, because I think it gives us kind of maximum flexibility to be creative and think about this and the implications for Maine and its people and our future. Before we dive a little bit more specifically into the agenda, Dan, would you share your intro too as well? Didn't want to exclude you.
No problem. Hi, everybody. I think I know everyone on the call here, but I'm Dan Matz, and I'm working in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. I'm here to listen and take notes and support you all in however I can, especially now that I have gotten the Zoom up and working. Happy to continue to help out.
Well, we compounded some of the confusion by embedding the Zoom link within our system Outlook, which has a Teams link. So I apologize to those of you that maybe started at Teams. So thanks for navigating it all.
It's a classic workforce issue as a result of COVID and remote.
Yeah, the inherent benefit of tech transformation at a rapid pace, and then the resulting chaos, right?
Precisely.
Yeah. So if it's okay, Eric and I are co-facilitating this series that I think we've all opted in, although maybe one or more of you might have been sort of slotted for this one. I'm not really sure how we all came to be here, but I'm going to work from the assumption we're all excited to be here regardless of how we got here, volunteer or voluntold. But I'm really excited about the idea that we've got a couple months to dive deeper on this particular topic and then bring it back to the broader group. So first, thanks for being part of it. Second, Eric and I, we did a pre-meeting about a week or so ago, and we sort of felt like our opportunity is to co-facilitate the conversation, but in the true sense of that word, for me, facilitation means kind of following the lead of the group as well, although I'll try to bring some structure to it and take some organizational responsibility and maybe some synthesis and et cetera. But if I could today, I think one of the more important things we need to do is just kind of level set on how we want to approach our work together. And as you saw with some repeated attempts, just getting busy people together is going to be challenging too. So if it's all right, I'll share my screen and just highlight the agenda that's been proposed, and we'll work through that for this hour, if that's okay with everyone. Let's see. Here it is, I think. We're all seeing a PDF that highlights the agenda, subgroup charge, etc.
Got it.
Okay, great. So what I propose we do today is spend a little bit of time discussing, and perhaps maybe, if not refining today, thinking at least about how we might want to refine our own charge, right? Our colleagues at the state, Dan and others, have synthesized some of the other discussions and framed up for us these 5 questions. And they have said to us, spend some time as a work group over the next, I think we have 2 to 3 months, maybe 2 to 3 months, thinking about these specific questions and others we might generate, and then bring back recommendations for AI and implications on the workforce. I thought it might be interesting to just talk a little bit about these 5 questions today, think about them with respect to aligning. Are they the right questions? Do they bring to mind other questions, et cetera? And then depending on how long we spend on that, maybe just throw some ideas around about opportunities and implications for the workforce. We've done a little bit about that, brainstorming, if you will, in some of our bigger group meetings. But we've also, in my view, we've spent a lot of time sort of being educated and sort of presented to. So I'm optimistic that in these smaller subgroups, we can make a lot of room for brainstorming and ideation over the next few weeks. And then I think in the third phase of our, now 40 minutes left in the agenda, I think we need to talk just logistically about how we want to work together, how often, on what cadence, et cetera. And that'll allow Dan, Eric, my colleagues on my team here, and I to set up a meeting schedule and get it all calendared, so we're not, fighting the week by week kind of appointment scheduling challenges that are inherent in just getting going. Is that an okay agenda for today?
Yeah, Chris, maybe just one thing that would be helpful to me is, I don't know if Dan or you or Eric or David have thoughts on what's the sort of range of things that we should be considering as we think about ultimately coming out with some recommendations here. Like one thing that I've got lots and lots of thoughts of what we as a society and what the government and companies can be doing different. But I'd kind of be curious just to hear what are the sorts of things that that might show up in a report ultimately.
I love that question. Dave, can I put you on the spot to lead off as our broader task force co-chair with your thoughts?
Well, as you certainly can. I think one of the recommendations is from a workforce perspective and a workforce development perspective, what are we seeing and what might we see prospectively? And I think that the closer that analysis can come to the real world, how is the nature of work changing as a result of artificial intelligence? And there I specifically mean what jobs are changing, how are they changing, and what that might mean for the future of employment in certain sectors, both from a skills development perspective and from a job, a job creation perspective where jobs may just vanquish. And I'm loosely speaking here, I'm thinking of jobs like administrative support. We don't have administrative, we type, we send texts, we type our own emails, as opposed to having someone who is supporting the function of delivering our communications. What is that going to look like? How's it going to change? How's it going to change work? And I think Mark has really helped us sort of begin to think about that. So we might be able to use that introductory analysis to channel some of those thoughts. Then I think the other side of that is, how do we prepare a workforce effectively to be highly productive in when they're working? And thirdly, if we can get there, what does that mean for a state in terms of how it sort of manages resources and incentivizes development in certain areas as opposed to other areas? And here specifically, I'm thinking of some augmentation to what might be something akin to the 10-year plan, where people actually are using that from a public policy standpoint to say, I think we should go here, not here. We have, and stuff like that. So those are sort of three different arenas where we might be able to consider proposals. And then how do we go about the process of really filtering those proposals out so that they've got some breadth to them, and so that there is a broader group of people who've had the opportunity to weigh in on that.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, what do others think about that question, though? When you think about what our opportunity for an ultimate deliverable is or could be, what have you thought about? I mean, why did you sign up for the original task in the first place? What were you hoping to achieve for the state?
Well, I'll take a crack. As I think about some of the expertise on this call, clearly one element of it is, and I know there's overlaps with the education. I think someone said earlier the education task force will probably overlap with us to some degree. But what are the kinds of skills that we think are going to be more in demand in the future generally? And I got a whole bunch of thoughts on that because I know where the pinch points are, at least in the companies I'm associated with. And I think folks from the community college system, folks from RU, there are lots of other education institutions and initiatives across the state. So how do we make sure that an education system that generally in the U.S. is not that well connected with workforce needs, how do we tighten that connection? And I think, by the way, both community colleges and RU are great examples of where it is connected. A lot of places it isn't very well connected. So one thing is, how do we tighten that connection and really think about that through the lens of through a lens where the marketplace for skills is changing very, very quickly. That'd be point one, and then I think point two would be applying the specific lens of a Maine's, the industries that operate in Maine, where we think that's going, what the government can do to support some things, developing faster than others. How do we make sure that Maine is using its unique skills to foster the kinds of things that we think are going to be, good places for Maine to be in the future relative to other states. So those are at least the things. Some of the things that occurred to me. I'm not sure if that's anywhere close to comprehensive, but at least that's what occurred to me.
Let me try. It's comprehensive for me. Let me try to synthesize a little what both President Degler and Warren have offered so far. Among our deliverables is some image of my words, not necessarily there, some image of the future opportunity for the state and its people, but some thoughts also about how to approach that with opportunities and risks in mind. and then implications for the state. And I really love, Dave, what you suggested around the state's 10-year economic plan is a guidepost that has resonated, and it's given people something to anchor to, and apply and contextualize some of their own vision or their own work or their own ideation about what's possible. Some appendix to that, some addition, and then Warren, you just took us to a place of leveraging Maine's strengths and unique advantages and distinctions and opportunities, and then also perhaps accelerating or at least making recommendations about how to bring the integration of education and workforce closer and more tightly together. I think that could be a pretty powerful series of, or at least narrative, if not specific recommendations. But what do others think about sort of where we're headed so far in terms of what our possible opportunity is? And Dan, I'm going to ask you at the end if this is what with your colleagues in government want from us all. So you could be thinking about that. Any
Wait, Julia's got her hand up.
The answer will be yes, right, Dan?
No, we want the honest answer. If we're going astray, we need you to tell us, Dan.
Well, Julia's better position than I am, probably, especially the 10-year economic.
Okay.
So I was leading that work 3 years ago. That's the inside joke, I guess.
Great.
So obviously I agree with that. I think particularly the 3 goals of our state really fit very well within an AI lens in while we grow productivity per worker and wages and so on, and how we are attracting talent to the state, to the state's labor force. But I think I agree with that sort of framework as how we position ourselves within those 3 buckets, and maybe all, I mean, I'm not trying to tell the other committees what to do, but it seems like a wide enough framework from that lens. But also I think going back to what everybody has shared is how do we bring industry into the conversation as well, and how do we engage with employers, particularly in a state like Maine that has so many sort of smaller employers, 25 employees and so on, and how do we provide some thoughts, ideas, and engage them, because maybe they're not as plugged into this work, and this conversation has to be bi-directional, not only how we are identifying those skills for the workers, but also for them to engage with the training side and how to support them in achieving those 3 economic development goals.
Nice. Sam, what are we not focusing enough on in your participation in all of our conversations so far? I'm struck that for me anyway, you always bring a unique point of view that's causes me to pause and sort of reflect on what I'm not thinking of. So what are we not thinking of yet in this conversation?
And thanks for the question, Chris. I think just to kind of piggyback off of what Julia was talking about, I think, as we think about employer perspectives and employer engagement, it's equally important to think about perspectives of workers and how we're connecting with folks who are seeing these changes as they roll out. I think oftentimes they're the ones that have the best sense, talking to teachers, in the context of education, that was really valuable the other day to look at, some of their perspectives about what does this actually look like on the ground. Certainly the folks that we talked to had a very positive outlook on the implementation of AI in their particular classrooms. I think you would get a very different set of perspectives from other teachers. And I think it's good to empower the full spectrum of folks to speak up and have their voices heard, because that's going to dictate the success of our transition is how well we can engage with folks who might not be the early adopters, who might have some real reservations about how this is affecting their classrooms, who have real experience to bring to bear. I think that's really important to not be dismissive of those folks who say, wait a second, this carries some risks. This carries some challenges. If, for example, I was thinking about something that Ulrich was talking about with the shift towards in-class assessments. I always did better on long papers. I liked having the time to think when I was writing an 8 to 10 page essay. And I think there was a lot of benefit to doing that work, the deep thinking that comes with writing a long essay. If you have students that are not doing that as much, they're relying on other tools to do that. And they're instead, and so teachers are shifting to do in-class assessments. I think you lose some of the learning that happens through the act of that specific, act of writing an essay. So just like thinking about those particular kinds of nuances and making sure that regardless of what sector we're talking about, we always think about how to engage workers and make that a priority at the policy making level, at the advisory level, et cetera. Another thing, just to get to the broader question of what our capacity is as a task force, I've been wrestling with this question a lot because, on the one hand, I think there's a lot of potential for us to offer some really good guidance, but I also see there's some really significant limitations because the technology is moving at a rate beyond what any of us can grasp. And so how do you make policy suggestions, advice, et cetera, for something that's moving much more quickly than that policy typically moves? I was struck by something that Ulrich said, which was, to be very specific, to be very targeted in the way that you try to approach these things. So thinking about how we might do that as we look at an issue like workforce, how that connects with education, I think that's going to be important for us to keep in mind. Just to be very practical, both in like taking a broad view, but also thinking about making suggestions that are focused enough to be useful.
Yeah, just building on that for a second, Sam. One of the things we work on at Northeastern all the time is we can't know the future, so we need to sort of design and think about a variety of scenarios and possibilities and build with agility and flexibility in mind so that when we encounter a new reality, or if pace of change is accelerating or slowing, we're able to, we think, try to adjust and meet the moment a little bit differently. It's easy to say, it's really hard to do. And as you just noted, even harder with the extra responsibility of public policy in mind, and sort of the fact that this isn't a business, this is a government agenda. And that has different responsibilities and sensibilities that have to be considered, or at least, acknowledged. And so with that, maybe Mark and Eric, can you bring in the state government perspective on this? You live in a different world than the rest of us, and Dan, and I would imagine your sort of North Star every day is driven by different responsibilities. How are you thinking about this from the state's perspective?
I can go if you don't want to, Mark. You ready?
Yeah, either way.
Yeah,
I have
okay.
some
Just
thoughts to share,
go right ahead.
I think from my perspective, I think that I wanted to build on a point that Warren raised earlier that I think is really pertinent in the context of AI, but is probably a pretty strong recommendation in really many contexts, which is the alignment between demand from the employer community, what skills they need, and the alignment with the workforce development system. I think is going to be a really important way that the state can be prepared for this, making sure that the curriculum from all aspects of the workforce development system, that could include, everything from adult education to the Maine community college system, the University of Maine system, and every other type of training, workforce training available, making sure that that's in alignment with what employers need and how they're incorporating this technology into their production process, so that workers are being prepared to be successful, and what they're being trained is in alignment with what the employer community is really seeking, to make sure that there are successful opportunities for young people, but also for people in transition. A huge part of what we do at the Department of Labor is to try to provide support to folks that are in that type of transition, whether it's because of a job loss, training for maybe a new career, maybe switching industries. So folks that are, some way midway through their career and they're facing a transition, maybe a really difficult economic situation. Younger people that are coming up, and maybe exploring their first career out of high school or college, maybe an apprenticeship program. Young people with disabilities, right? What are the opportunities that are going to set them up for success? And from the perspective of Department of Labor, we are not the folks generally that are providing the training. We are the folks that are working with those individuals and trying to connect them to the training providers. But in order to be successful, I think both in terms of employers to be successful to get the talent that they need to continue to deliver products and services efficiently, and from the perspective of job seekers, making sure that they are successful, that they are equipped when they complete a training program or a degree program, that they are coming equipped to be successful. That alignment between the workforce development system, the skills that people are being prepared for, and industry, what skills are needed, what skills are in demand in this really fast-changing landscape. I think that's in any context, but in the context of AI specifically, is a unique strength for sure.
Absolutely.
Eric, anything else that you had, or?
Yeah, I can maybe offer a little bit of another perspective from state government. And while certainly Mark and I work in the same arena and share that perspective, operationally, the Bureau of Unemployment is a very transactional bureau. So we're also thinking about the opportunities that AI can open up for us to be more efficient in connecting with our clients, the folks that are filing claims, or all of the employers that we're interacting with that are paying a tax on their payroll. So we're handling a lot of data, a lot of individual transactions, and we've got a pretty large workforce ourselves that I think there are lots of opportunities to leverage AI internally for us to be better at what we do and to be more efficient, and through that protect the integrity of our program, which is overall, that's our overarching goal. So I think we have a sense that we really want to see policy within the state that provides a culture that embraces early adoption of technologies, access to understanding how to utilize those technologies, as our primary focus. And I think that's going to appeal to a lot of folks that are doing business in the state of Maine as well. And I think it'll serve the state of Maine, thinking about this broad perspective of, attracting business, being business friendly, being tied in with the goals and aspirations of education. And I think that's, from our perspective anyway, the right focus on developing, a posture towards or around AI. And there's a whole other side of that coin, which are all the concerns and risks as well. But I think, from our perspective, the focal point is, how do we understand this? How do we embrace it and figure out how to make it work for us? And then, put the risks in proper perspective around that.
Yeah. I guess Dave had a hand, and Sam, then Julia.
So I am, as listening to this conversation, I'm going back to your original comment, and a word I haven't used as often lately, but I think is very pertinent here, is how, from a public policy standpoint and from a workforce development standpoint, how do we build that notion of agility? Because, and Chris, you're exactly right, we can't predict the future. If we've learned anything in the last 6 years, we can't predict the future. So, but how do you build and support, a broad base of people who are agile enough to adapt to changing circumstances?
I forget the sequence. Was it Sam, then Julia, or Julia and Sam? Either way.
Yeah, I think so. I was just gonna piggyback on some things that Eric was getting into and encourage us to think about how we could use AI to improve the various support systems that exist to help workers, especially low income workers, get into better careers. Because that's something that I've been struck by in my current work with AFL-CIO, running a pre-apprenticeship and working with a lot of out of work, low income individuals. It is absolutely labyrinthine trying to navigate FedCap, Workforce Opportunity Act, CSSP, Peer Workforce Navigators, all the Voc Rehab, all these different programs that exist to help many of the same folks. There's significant overlap, which is great that there are a lot of resources to go around for those folks, but it's so complicated that a lot of them have a hard time navigating that successfully and accessing any resources because they just get overwhelmed. So if we can think about how we can make that entire system work more effectively for that population, I think it will do us a real service, with all of these workforce programs.
Yeah, and could get exactly at what Mark and Eric were talking about in terms of on the other side of that, improving efficiency and effectiveness of government, optimizing the experience and the journey for Mainers who need and are wanting to access these services. Using AI to simplify that on both sides of the coin could be really, really powerful. Oh yeah.
I was going in a similar direction, but going back to President Dagler's also agility, I think that's one of Maine's sort of secret sauce that we should capitalize on. And know that I'm not a believer that the workforce development system is able to shift, but I worry that if our recommendations are have to be wide enough that, and at this, like a mix of, because otherwise, if we don't see any wins or in public policy, then we're gonna get stalled at some point. And so I think overall what I'm trying to say also is that at least we should be clear that AI is here and that is something we need to manage, and how we outline those risks is important. But I think to avoid the ongoing debate of is AI, are we going to endorse AI and all those things, I think at least for us to send a clear message of how we're managing that for Maine, I think would be the biggest win.
Right. I think if it's all right, I'll take my facilitator hat off and just offer a personal perspective on the question. And that is, I think that the more we can, at least in exercises, if not in the final report, push ourselves to really be unconstrained in our thinking and big and bold, the better. I've said this in some of the broader groups. I think we're already falling behind as a state relative to other states in terms of the economic and human potential of this age that has begun and has really exploded the last couple of years, or has been with us for 50 years and has really accelerated in the last couple of years, depending on how you think about it. So I personally think that we have, if not a responsibility, we have an opportunity to be a voice for really big ideas and big thinking. And then I think it's up to the governor and her teams, as to how and to what degree she sort of accepts our sort of perspective and what have you, and how it turns into action and policy and et cetera. But I just offer that frame here. If not us, who is going to really be pushing for, leaning into this in its fullest potential? I mean, Warren's building an organization focused on the future of work. I mean, what bigger topic than that to kind of sink your teeth into, and all the inherent kind of human connected opportunities of all that. That sounds pretty kind of maybe dramatic, but I think it's real, especially in a state that doesn't necessarily have all the resources in the world to throw at this. So we're going to have to be really smart and strategic about what bets we do place.
Just listening to the conversation, it feels like we've heard there's transformation potential in our education system. There's transformation potential in our government system and how it serves workers. I think that was Sam's point. There's transformation potential in our companies, and there's transformation potential in our workers themselves. And one of the things I thought I would mention, I'm mostly focused on transformation potential at companies. We actually built a tool that we use to go in. It's actually an AI-driven tool that looks for AI opportunity inside of companies. And so what it does is it breaks companies up into bits, into basically people, systems, and processes, and looks for opportunity to use AI to enhance how they do their people, systems, and processes. And we're using it for our companies, and we're beginning to use it for companies of other investment advisors. And anyway, I don't know how that tool may or may not be able to be used here, but I do think that the thinking behind it, of like, how do you break apart this, the jobs we have today and what they're going to look like in the future, and then how do we think about which bits of those are going to be obsolete and which bits of those are going to require sort of like Centaur-like capabilities, where you actually have domain and technological capabilities that allow you to use the tools, and which things are going to be more safe. Anyway, I feel like there's an interesting one frame is to just think about like thinking about jobs and breaking those jobs into pieces. And that was a little bit what Mark was sharing when he shared his stuff with the larger group. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with that, but it does feel like there's a sort of a potential to sort of try to zero in on this very specific things that could change, and what do you do about it, depending on whether you're a company or a human or a policy setter.
Yeah, I like that four-pronged transformation framework too. We might keep that in mind in terms of how to organize our output. Just noticing the clock, we got about 9 minutes left. And so I think I'd like to use that time, not necessarily to evaluate the questions, because I think we just talked a lot about those 5 framing questions that our colleagues had given us. And one way to think about how we might use subsequent meetings is to just tackle one question at a time and facilitate a conversation much like this, and then lead us to some themes and some findings and some recommendations. How do we want to work together, though? On what cadence? Do we want to work in person ever? Does an hour a week do it and we eventually get there? Would you all like to come together for like a half day and kind of tackle a big chunk of work and lay some foundation? I mean, there's a million ways we could decide to work together as a group. Any preferences, strong or otherwise, or suggestions? I think the default will be we'll meet every couple of weeks for the next however long it takes. But what are some thoughts that you all have about what you'd prefer?
I think, we're certainly all busy people, but I do think the complexity of these topics requires more time than we have in an hour. I think, like just thinking about all the things we could talk about in this first meeting, and kudos to your facilitation, Chris. It's been a really rich conversation, but I feel like there's so much more that we could get into. So I think we will need more time in some of these conversations. I don't dislike the idea of getting together for a half day to hash some stuff out, if that's in person, and just going through things, especially as we get further along in the process, really getting down to putting some bullet points together. I think that could be a good option.
Thanks, Sam. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I like the idea of culminating. I don't know when our group needs to come up with its recommendations, but I like the idea of culminating with something in person. Maybe it's a half-day session. I think that'd be great.
So what if we did, Dan, could you remind us of the answer to that question? When are we due to converge with the broader group with something substantive in hand?
The broader framework here is that between now and basically the end of July, we're hoping that folks can really dig into these things. And then our team at GoPIF is planning on spending basically the month of August pulling in the products of all 6 different groups. And then we're going to come back in September and October and as larger groups and think about synthesis and think about pulling it all presenting it back to the rest of the task force and pulling it all together. So end of July is the short answer here. Yeah.
What if we did, so we got like 2.5 months and we've got vacations, I'm sure, with it being summer in Maine and that sort of thing. But what if we did like a every other week 90-minute session till about the early part of July, and then try to find a half day, first or second week of July, to get in a room and pull it all together, and then finish up asynchronously, maybe assign sections of a proposal as you would write any sort of final report. Someone or someones can edit it, something like that sound okay? A few 90-minute discussions. Maybe we take each of these questions and use them as at least the sort of aspirational question, and we can then take the conversation wherever it wants to go that day. Work through the 5 questions and converge for a half day at one of our facilities and do a little mini kind of workshop to land the plane. Okay, that sounds good. Then the hard one. How do we find 90 minutes that's consistently available and we don't have to go week by week? Is there some magic hour that isn't 5 p.m. with cocktails?
Is this a magic hour? Is this time, since it worked for everybody, is this a time that we could just add half an hour to one side or the other and use this time? I mean,
generally it works for me. We've just sort of forced it a little bit here because we're running out of options, but that might be a nice simple way to start.
I mean, Chris, we could do like, if we did like 28th, 11th, 25th, and then 9th is a half day. Those are all Wednesdays. 9th is a half day in the morning. We'd be happy to host at our office if folks wanted to, and that gives us, 3, or is that one? That's 1, 2, 3. That's 3 virtual and then 1 in person.
Yeah. Starting on the 20th, so like every couple weeks.
I do think I've got a couple of those available, a couple not, but don't work around my schedule. And Julia and I can work together to make sure that we've got coverage. I think I heard you sort of leapfrog the 4th and go to the 5th. I will remind this group that we have a large task force meeting on the 4th at 2 o'clock. Yeah, so this hour.
All right, let me work with my team, and if you haven't already, if you have an EA, and I know not everyone does, but if you have one, we make sure that person can contact Rachel Lukens. She's the meeting organizer for today's meeting, and we'll let the EAs among us do what they do better than we do, and which is sort of navigate calendars. If you don't have an EA, I think what I'm going to ask Rachel to do is sort of, if you're all right, at least as a starting point, look for Wednesday afternoons on some cadence, because it worked today. One of our colleagues is a representative, and he let us know that his next few weeks is going to be just really difficult and not to schedule around him, that he'll try to join as he can. So we'll circle back with him as well. But I think I'll take this into email and try to propose what Dan's put in the chat for us here. Maybe it seems to me like we might need 1 more virtual ahead of, because we've got 5 framing questions, but we could maybe put the 4th one on as if needed ahead of an in-person. And then if everyone's okay with it, I don't know that we want to derail the schedule because I'm going to miss 1 meeting, right? I'll catch up on the next one. Is that okay with everyone? And then, if you can, like Dave and Julia will coordinate to make sure the community college is represented, et cetera. Or do we want to have a different view about, well, if Eric can't be here, then we should find another date?
No, Chris, I think that's a great strategy. We've really got to charge forward, and as long as we've got most of our group and representation, we'll make progress and advance all these topics.
So maybe if we do propose a schedule and you can't make 2 or more meetings, though, that might be a signal that we're in the wrong sort of hour or day, and we should try to regroup. I think each or any of us missing 1 of the series is probably okay. but we don't want to, you know, not have, you know, any of us not with us for 2 meetings.
And I think, Chris, also if the Rachel and trying to schedule, definitely I think the half a day when we're all coming together just to make sure that the majority, if not all of us, are able to make that date. I think that's critical.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that we have to find the day that works for all on that one, and we'll ask Rachel to work with each of you and your teams to do that. Eric and Dan, I'll just ask you to keep us all sort of compliant with whatever responsibilities we have vis-a-vis sort of recordings and public access. I just don't know that world. So if you could keep us on the straight path there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. We'll get something out over email in the next couple of days and look forward to working on this opportunity with you all.
Thank you all.
very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Thank you.